Hello and welcome to Conversations With, our monthly series of informal and enlightening conversations between the leading edge teacher and author, Jim Self, and some of today's most progressive and connected teachers, channels, and authors. Now, here's our host, Jim Self.
Let's go back a little bit. I'd like you to say a little bit more about your findings with regard to what the heart does, the science of the heart, that whole sense of the nervous system within the heart, the hormone generation in the heart. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about those findings, how they're different from what we generally think.
Here's a statement that's probably going to end up on my tombstone because I've said it so many times. The heart is actually more than a blood pump. It's an information processing center in our body, sending powerful healing commands to the brain and throughout the entire system, and it does it in 4 ways. How was that?
Good. Thank you.
So
excellent.
It does it in 4 ways. What we know now, not just HeartMath research, we found research scattered all around the world. What we did is we connected the dots and put together a coherent story that a little southern boy like me can actually explain to people. And basically what we found was that the heart is not just a blood pump. It's definitely a cardiovascular organ. It's the most amazing pump that there's ever been on planet Earth, but it's more than that. It's actually, as I said, an information processing center in our body. It does send information to every single part of our system, important, essential information. The 4 ways are this. The heart actually has a nervous system. It's studied through a medical field called neurocardiology, and there are conferences on this. Who knew, right? But this nervous system next to the brain is the most complex part of our nervous system that there is, and it consists of neurons and proteins support cells. I mean, neurons are generally considered only to be in the brain, but they're in the heart too. And it sends information to the big brain in the head through a nerve pathway that starts out in the heart and then goes up and through the lower centers of the brain, goes right through what's the mid-level brain where the limbic system is, which is where a lot of our emotional processing takes place, and then stops or terminates all the way up into what's called the neocortex, higher perceptual centers of our brain. So you have this conversation happening. Brain sends some information down to the heart, primarily just controlling the timing of the heartbeat. Heart sending information back to the brain. When scientists look at the neurological traffic in our bodies, they can clearly see that the heart is sending a lot more information to the brain than it's getting from the brain. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's one way. The second way is through something called the blood pressure wave. If you place your finger on your wrist, you feel your pulse. The pulse is actually a wave of energy created by the squeezing of the heart muscle that pushes the blood through the veins and the arteries. Now, obviously, blood gets to every part of our body, so the blood pressure wave does too. The blood pressure wave is actually traveling slightly ahead of the blood, microseconds ahead. Well, blood pressure wave changes influence biological functions. One of the things that they have a big influence on is brain activity. The electrical activity in our brains actually synchronize to changes occurring in the blood pressure wave. That's called a biophysical form of communication, and that's your second way. The third way was another one of these things that I like to call a who knew, because it was in the research literature, but nobody paid any attention to it. In 1983, the heart was reclassified as being not only a cardiovascular organ, but a hormonal gland, part of our hormonal system. They found that the heart was producing a number of hormones. One of those is called atrial peptide. One of atrial peptide's jobs is to reduce the release of the stress hormone cortisol. That's pretty interesting to me. You got a hormone produced in our heart trying to back down a stress hormone. It also produces a hormone that many of the listeners may have heard of called oxytocin. Oxytocin is generically called the love hormone. It's produced in greater amounts when people are in loving states. And new research is showing that when people are in states like compassion, empathy, and trusting another, that their oxytocin levels go up. And the heart's one of the primary producers of oxytocin in our body. So those are the first 3 ways: neurological, biophysical, and biochemical. They're well documented, well understood, well researched, and they're what's called hardwired biological communication pathways. The 4th way is what we talked about before, and I'll take it a step further. It's the energetic communication, the electromagnetic field produced by the heart, and the other fields that are less easy to measure but that we believe exist. So you have this field of information communication. So the research going on now would be looking at things like, how does the heart's field affect the little field produced by the brain? How does the hearts of one person affect the heart of another? What happens in a collective field of people? Let's say even a small thing like in an office or a meeting, or take it a step further, like maybe somewhere where there's a group of people at a sporting event or somewhere I'm speaking or something like that. There's a collective field. And now, as we've talked about, we look at the collective field of humanity and its relationship to the energetic fields of the earth itself. That's the kind of exciting research. And my belief is that the most important information that the heart is sending to us is actually taking place at the energetic level. The other biological information is important, but the information that's the more refined, intuitive type of intelligence that the heart offers us is happening through an energetic transfer that we can now begin to see through the lens of third-dimensional measurements, looking at the heart's energetic field in its relationship to other things.
Yeah. It's going to be very exciting as the technology catches up with the experience, and you begin to see the overriding opportunities that are provided by the heart in higher frequency ranges that are accessible when that alignment of the heart, similar to what I was saying with those thinking from the heart and those thought levels, really begin to align. And it's very exciting. Say a little bit, too, if you can, about time as it relates to present time and what I define as third-dimensional linear time, where for the most part we spend most of our attention in the past worrying about the future, or in the past hoping about the future, but very much past, future, very, very little in present time. When you get into present time, that heart structure changes. How do you find that structuring work?
Well, it's an interesting question. I haven't had anybody ask me that on the show, I don't think, but this is an interesting one. Let me go back to the first of last year, and when I was on an airplane leaving, I think it was the first major trip I took in early January of last year, going down to Australia to speak, and I was on a plane, I was thinking about some things, and I recognize that, sometimes when I get introduced on a show like yours or whatever, they call me, pioneer of new intelligence, futurist, and, all that sort of thing. And I thought, I'm none of that, really. What I really want to be is I'm an aspiring nowist. Perfect. I want to be in the current moment. I don't think that when I talk about the now, I'm talking about this absolute state that sometimes gets discussed, where you have no present, no past or no future. That's not quite what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is being very, very present in any moment, so that I'm fully engaged with where I am and who I'm with. You see, in my own personal work, I'll be open and vulnerable with you and the listeners now. One of the things I get feedback on is sometimes I'm there and sometimes I'm kind of not. And I have this really cool ability to be there and not be there. For example, I'll get feedback sometimes in the meetings, in executive meeting, for example, that, you look like you're spacing out, and but they can ask me a question and I can give them a crisp answer right away. It's like I'm paying attention on one level and not on another. And people that know me well catch me on that, right? And they give me feedback because I can be listening and I can give them an answer, but I'm not fully engaged. Part of my consciousness is usually thinking about something else that's coming up. I'm moved into the future. And so what that does is it creates a situation where people sometimes feel a little cut off from me. They don't feel like they're getting the full Howard Martin, that I'm not engaged with them in a respectful heart way. And so that gift that I have of being able to sort of split screen things becomes a deficit. It becomes a deficit because I'm not using my heart enough to care enough about being fully present in that situation. So being in the present moment, to me, is not about there is no past, there's nothing coming up in the future. It's just about what's going on around me right now. What does this room look like? What do the colors in here look like? What is this show like? What am I feeling with you, Jim? And what am I feeling with the audience? And being fully present for you right now and for these people who've taken their time to listen, that's being present in the moment, not thinking about what I've got to do when this show ends. And I think that's really important.
It's a real important piece, and from my perspective, where I play in that, I know that space you're talking, and so do many of the students that we're working with. One of the things that happens in present time, your perception of the awareness around you, which is both physical and non-physical, time-based and non-time-based, begins to be instantaneous awareness. It begins to be a whole different point of perception. So I understand what you're saying when it's like I'm not caring about the person I'm with, but your answer is very accurate, is I am very present and I am aware of what you're asking me. It's as if I'm in a little tiny room with you personally, and then I step into a larger auditorium. I'm aware of the larger space simultaneously with this space. And I think we're working on, at least in my awareness with that place, is I'm working on how do I hold that attention point very clearly on the person I'm engaged with, and how do I hold the same awareness without one being a distraction from the other. And I think that's a learning space that we're stepping into more than a detrimental space or an uncaring space. And I think that space is going to become a fantastic space where you're able to draw much more awareness into a creative space. When I play in that space with people who simultaneously can play in that space also, what I find is the focus is still very focused on what we are engaged with, and the ability to get to either solution or opportunity is much quicker than if I relied on my hello, how are you, wait for an answer to come back, and then engage in that back and forth space. So I think what you're defining from my reference point is one of these cutting-edge aspects of consciousness that is a tremendous asset when understood. And we just don't understand it because our habits and our beliefs are structured in such a way that we haven't let them expand into this new awareness. So what you're defining is very exciting from my point of view.
If you enjoyed this highlight from Conversations With, join Jim Self live on the Awakening Zone Network. That's awakeningzone.com. If you're looking for free tools for your personal and spiritual growth, if you want to be who you came here to be, visit masteringalchemy.com, where you can learn more about Jim, his work, and future guests. Our theme song is Hands of Love by Barry Goldstein. May you experience laughter and grace on your journey home.